So from that point forward, I was sitting in the back row, as I always do, and Ron with his little his speeches up here, his little sermons. I'm sitting in the back row, and then I don't know, it was the prodigal son, I guess, his sermon on the prodigal son, and I found myself just weeping, just out of control, which I'm about to do now. And it was a bizarre experience and something I'm a man's man, and for me to cry, that's just not in my emotional lexicon. It just doesn't happen. And so as I sat back there, just tears streaming down the side of my face, I was like, whoa, something's wrong here. I got to go. So I did. I made a hasty exit, and so I was like, wow, that was just strange. I don't know what's going on. So I had to come back again next week, and then he had some message on God's knocking at your door. Are you going to let him in? I'm like, oh my God, you're killing me. You know? So I started, again, streaming tears down the side of my face. I'm like, something's wrong here. So I threatened him one day. I said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your tape out there because I don't believe that you're really saying the words that you're saying. I believe that you're talking to me and that everybody else hears different words and something's going on here that I can't appreciate. So I did. I took his tape and I took it home and I listened to it and it hit me again and I'm sitting in my chair going, oh God, something's going on here and I'm not digging it. So it was really a welling up of emotion.
So, Shannon, it was really neat to see how, through some different kinds of experiences, God just kind of grabbed you, especially in that communion service.
Yeah, grabbed a hold of me, picked me up, shook me, and put me back down is what he did.
Okay. You enjoyed that, huh?
Yes, actually, I did.
What was that like for you? Keep the mic up here.
It was completely overwhelming. It was very powerful, and it was life-changing. After that moment, there will be no going back. You can't go back. You can't feel God. You cannot feel God reach into you and let you know very powerfully that He's there, and ignore that and walk away from that. I'd spent my childhood being introduced to God, spent a lot of growing up years getting away from God, and then felt a need to come back to God. Growing, and then I showed up here and 2x4 over the head. It's like, you're finally doing what I want you to do, and I'm here and I'm watching and I'm with you. And in that minute, He removed every doubt about what I needed to do, where I needed to be, and it was very powerful. It's really hard to explain. It was a blessing. It was a gift. It was.
How did you know?
Well,
this wasn't just a mood swing or something with the weather?
Because you can't, I don't even know how to answer that question. How do you know? I mean, you just know. I mean, there was just no question. It was so powerful and so overwhelming. I mean, initially it was just, I'm crying, I'm shaking, I don't know what's going on, and we did communion, I could barely even hold the bread, and I went home and I had plans that night. I canceled my plans. I said, I just need to sit here and feel this. This is incredible. And
each of these guys had a lot of time as an adult when they sort of went away from God and just kind of ignored God for a while, and then God drew them back. In your case, as a very young child, you had a lot of questions about God. And in fact, it was your questions that led your mom and then your dad to start coming to church. When did you start thinking about God? Do you remember that? Has it just kind of always been that way?
Been that way ever since I've been able to talk.
Okay. Which was like 8 months, something like that. What were some of your... Tell us how you first got to know God. What was that like? What are the things you wondered about? Did you pray to God, like when you were really young, or how did this whole thing start to happen inside Riley?
It started when I started asking questions about God, as if I didn't know about Him or anything He did in my life, because I didn't read the Bible back then when it started. And then my mom didn't know any of the answers to my questions about Him, so she started going to church with me. We went to church sometime and then we moved here. We found this church and said this is the church for us.
And for myself, I felt like I had a connection with God probably before I started elementary school, but in my teenage years I started to drift away and started to have doubt, and could anyone love me as much as everyone says they do? And I feel that I still went to church, but it was kind of my beginning of kind of turning my back and really seeing, is there something else out there? And not too long ago, I started to really feel, you know what, I'm really missing something. God really is who He is, and He is something that I really want to have that relationship again.
That kind of rang a bell to me, because I've always heard, people telling me that, Jesus died for our sins, and it really was never personable. And putting it into that perspective, to me that was kind of an ultimate sacrifice, that somebody who didn't even know me thousands of years ago actually, died for everything that I'm doing wrong today, and, still accepting me and loving me. And
that wasn't just the sins of the whole world, but it was also Brian's sins.
Right. So when I looked at it that way, to me that was an ultimate sacrifice, and that's something that kind of touched me.
Was there, what's it been like to be drawn by God? What's that process about?
Kind of like you were talking about with the rototiller, sometimes breaking apart all the stuff that generally gets in your way. In the past, a little over 2 years, I had pretty much my life turned upside down in a very slow but dramatic process, and kind of everything that seemed like it was stable kind of went away, and really it left me without having that base anymore of I have to be doing things this way because that way didn't exist anymore. And I really still felt the opportunity recently, towards the beginning of this year and coming up through summer, that I needed to go to church more, and it was a slow process until I came to the gathering. And it was kind of like when you go on a roller coaster and they slowly take you up to the top of the hill and then they let you go, and it's just been this accelerated growth process that I was talking to Ron, and he said that there is a certain point where when Jesus comes into your life, it's kind of you hit this end and the old self dies and the new self is born and you can't go back. And I keep looking at it kind of like what Brian said. I didn't have a specific instance where all of a sudden Jesus showed up in my life one day and I could say that that's the day that it happened. But if I look back over the past 2 months, it's almost like a 90-degree turn, that there's no way I could go back anymore to who I was, but there's no specific pinpoint. It's just been this, all of a sudden looking now, I go, Jesus is in my life and there's no way I could act the way I used to do.
And recently I got a job. I start tomorrow morning, my first job ever. And so it's just it took beating me down and breaking me before I could really experience that joy. And I told Ron this, and my wife has seen this, is that I really do have a sense of joy now. And I struggle still, believe me, not with the faith thing necessarily, but with the giving it up and saying, I get so intense on, God, this has got to happen. And I'm like, okay, look, I got all this anxiety. Here you go, Lord. There you go. Now just take care of it and get back to me when it's done. And predominantly that's happened for the most part. And so I guess I'm being welcomed back into the family of God. And as an indication of that, I've never, as you might notice, I've never worn a name tag for this church because I didn't want to be known. And today that changes for me.